I never anticipated my life to descend into a series of events that were equal parts amusing, painful, and absurdly ironic, but here I am, grabbing at the shards of a life that feels almost unreal. I used to joke about having my ex be bigger in every way, a phrase that somehow captured the essence of not only his physical dimensions but also the grandiosity of our chaotic romance, and that casual remark set off a chain of events that would completely reshape my reality. My husband, Tom, has always had a soft spot for my sharp wit, but even he couldn't predict the catastrophe that followed my statement at a fairly routine dinner party. It all started on a cold autumn evening, when the leaves outside decked the landscape in vivid reds and oranges. I found myself in a quiet area of our favorite restaurant with Tom. Laughter, recollections, and shared secrets filled the space between us, just like they did on evenings when we attempted to remember why we fell in love. Even as we basked in the peaceful calm, I couldn't help but sense a familiarity that hinted at buried tensions beneath our seemingly ideal relationship. Tom was an enigma, a man with a soft smile that could conceal stormy storms from his past and a resolute personality that kept him grounded in the present. But he was restless, a yearning to be recognized for his power, his conventional masculinity, that seemed to contradict my more easygoing, self-deprecating approach to life. During that evening, spurred by a combination of booze and uninhibited honesty, I made a remark that would quickly unravel the delicate threads of what I thought was a solid life together. Between morsels of grilled salmon and exchanged memories, the talk abruptly turned to our relationships, the complex downsides and upsides of love. I remembered a prior partner, a certain ex who was, by every exaggeration, bigger in every way. My remarks were intended to be satirical, a funny exaggeration of that person's physical and emotional dimensions, but in retrospect, I wish I had held back. Tom's demeanor moved imperceptibly from amusement to hurt, as if my words had touched a deep-seated nerve within him. The supper concluded with an awkward goodbye and a hush that seemed to follow us home. I spent the remainder of the night uneasy, unable to shake the feeling that the joke I had intended as a light-hearted prank had become a ticking bomb in our usually peaceful relationship. The next morning, I awakened to a more noticeable absence than usual. Tom's morning texts, which had once been a ritual of our shared intimacy, were conspicuously missing. I figured he was merely preoccupied with his own thoughts, dismissing the occurrence as a small stumbling block in our marriage. But as the hours went into days, the quiet became deafening, tearing at the very fabric of our relationship. As the days passed, the gap between us grew. What began as a quiet disappointment grew into a gap in which connection faded. I reached out several times, sending messages of worry and apologies, all of which were met with either curt responses or ghostly silence. My phone, which was once a doorway to our shared world, now just shows notifications of my own reminders and ignored calls. I began to worry if I had done an irreparable betrayal simply by making an ill-advised remark, but the solution appeared to lie someplace beyond simple misunderstandings. I resolved to face Tom in person, believing that a talk over morning coffee would heal the divide. The next time we met in our favorite local cafe, a place filled with memories of laughing and shared dreams, I approached him tentatively. His eyes, which were often filled with kindness, were suddenly darkened with the weight of unspoken grievances. I muttered apologies, explanations, and requests for understanding, but each word seemed to bounce back against a wall made of his own pain. "I'm trying to understand," he replied quietly, his voice barely heard above the clatter of drinks and whispered conversation around us. "Can't you see I'm hurting?" His tone was raw, shattering the fragile surface of our earlier chats, and I knew that the comment, as insignificant as it appeared in the moment, was a symptom of deeper scars that both of us had long ignored. The days after were a haze of emotional agony. I fell into a loop of self-reflection, repeating every speech and gesture in search of any indication that things could possibly be salvaged. I remembered how, in the early days of my relationship with Tom, we had openly discussed our insecurities, his about not meeting the conventional standard of manliness, mine about fearing inadequacy in a world that continually expected perfection. In the midst of all our shared vulnerabilities, I had lost sight of the delicate balance that held us together. My casual remark about my ex was not intended to be a blow, but rather as a passing reference to a ludicrous past. Unfortunately, it was interpreted as a damning contrast, implying that his own significance paled in comparison to an inflated past. Tom's retreat into silence was more than just a reaction to that one event. It was the result of accumulating frustrations, both real and imagined, over decades. In an effort to reconcile our differences, I began to examine our common memories from a different perspective. I found myself repeatedly returning to the early days, when we bonded by mutual self-doubt and a drive to establish our worth to the world. I recalled how we would spend long evenings discussing society's absurd demands, and how we admired one another's flaws as badges of honor. Now, it appeared that those moments had given way to a harsh reality in which words lost their significance and silence said volumes. One evening, when the frost of winter set in and the world outside my window darkened, I sat alone with my thoughts, a mug of tea clasped in shaky hands. The silence in our house was oppressive, with each empty room echoing memories of shared laughter and whispered promises. In this loneliness, I decided to describe my personal journey, a desperate attempt to uncover the facts hidden beneath the layers of hatred and misinterpretation. My diary became a safe haven for my emotions, a place where I could confess to the quiet pages about the countless things I wished I had spoken, the anxieties I felt but never dared to express. The written word provided me with some solace, a momentary escape from the reality of being abandoned by the one person who had once meant everything to me. I sifted through old letters and texts, attempting to put together the timing of our breakdown. It was fascinating, however painful, to witness how moments of laughter and shared humor had gradually been eclipsed by little misunderstandings that grew into enormous obstacles. My diary entries grew longer as I detailed every minor interaction, a smile, a sigh, a missed call, that now carried considerably more weight than their initial meaning. Our memories of the past, once entwined in a tapestry of vivid emotion, had faded into a collection of half-remembered photos, each one a bitter reminder of what we had lost. In an effort to close the distance between us, I contacted a valued friend who had served as both a confidant and a sounding board for all of my problems. Elena's incisive wit and sympathetic personality have always provided a source of clarity in times of emotional confusion. Over coffee in a cozy small cafe, I described the circumstances that had left me feeling alienated and desperate. I said something about my ex being bigger in every way, and now I can't even get a text back from Tom, I admitted, my voice filled with regret and dismay. Elena's eyes widened for a second before she leaned in with a sweet expression of empathy. Sometimes, what we say in jest goes deeper than we intend. However, it is not always simply the words that matter, it is also what they symbolize. Are you certain that was a fluke and not something more? Her question hung in the air, tempting me with buried facts I wasn't prepared to confront. I wasn't sure if Tom was driven away by my comment or by the silent accumulation of our unresolved concerns. Determined to save what remained of our relationship, I knew I had to face the situation head-on. I decided to ask Tom on an unplanned vacation back to the site where we first met, thinking that the spark of nostalgia might reignite our fading warmth. We set off on a bright, clear morning for the coastal village of Seabrook, which was both a part of our history and a symbol of our irretrievable past. The trip was punctuated by moments of comfortable silence interspersed with timid small talk, a delicate reminder of when communication was simple, when our words served as bridges rather than barriers. Seabrook, with its windswept beaches and tiny seaside homes, appeared to offer a return to simpler times. We walked along the beach, the rhythmic crashing of waves serving as a backdrop to our tentative attempts at reconnecting. Amid the salty breeze and the sweet murmur of the water, I reached for Tom's hand, a symbolic and desperate gesture. For a brief moment, his fingers tightened around mine, and I dared to hope that we might yet find our way back together. But as swiftly as hope appeared, it was overtaken by the harsh reality of unsolved conflict. Tom withdrew his fingers, and I saw a silent appeal for space, a gap that words could no longer fill. That evening, in a small, softly lit cafe overlooking the port, we tried to recapture the thrill of our previous days. The talk alternated between honest reminiscing and awkward pauses. I apologized, explaining that my comment was a badly selected attempt at humor, intended to lighten the burden of the past rather than to cause grief. Tom listened, his eyes a volatile combination of sadness and resignation. "It wasn't just the comment," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "We left everything unsaid. I needed you to see the tiny things, that I felt diminished, that I wasn't enough." His remarks hit me hard, exposing the flaws in our relationship that I had been too blind to perceive. That night's chat was a mosaic of unfinished thoughts and unhealed wounds, a careful dance around the painful facts we shared. Back home, the aroma of the sea and the trip's lingering warmth lingered as bittersweet recollections of what may have happened. I went back to my diary and filled its pages with thoughts on remorse and reconciliation. The words came out fresh and unedited, a confession of my greatest worries that I had taken our relationship for granted. In the silence of my room, I recognized that our relationship was at a crossroads, torn between the need to heal and the pull of impending separation. The image of Tom's fleeing figure dogged my every thought, emphasizing the gravity of our estrangement with the inescapable truth that sometimes words, once spoken, cannot be completely reversed. Weeks went into torturous limbo as I waited for a sign, a text, a phone, anything, that Tom was still fighting for us. I examined my phone with an unquenchable want for reassurance, each notification a possible lifeline. But nothing arrived. Instead, I sought refuge in solitary times of meditation, stitching together the parts of a wonderful yet broken love. In those moments, I remembered the first time Tom confided in me about his fears. It was a stormy night at our first apartment, and the winds outside were as violent as the emotions within. He had revealed, his voice shaking with vulnerability, that he felt overwhelmed by the expectations of being a strong, trustworthy man, a role that frequently left him feeling alienated and misunderstood. His candor had drew me closer to him, tying us together with an implicit promise of empathy and acceptance. However, throughout the course of our shared life, those bedrock moments had been destroyed by the gradual creep of anger and silent apologies. I realized that our love story was defined not by isolated episodes, but by a tapestry of emotional and tumultuous moments that fashioned us into the individuals we are today. The understanding carried with it a deep melancholy. It was as if the echoes of our previous laughing had drowned in the silence of our fragmented present. I remembered how we danced in the rain in a city park, the absolute ecstasy and spontaneity of the moment eclipsed only by the banal hardships of everyday life. Those memories were like delicate glass, with the ability to reflect the many colors of our love if we could piece them together without being cut by reality's rough edges. With each attempt to reconnect, I was reminded that forgiveness is a journey, a winding path through the landscapes of loss, remorse, and, eventually, understanding. I composed letters to Tom that I never sent, each a frantic attempt to express the complexities of my emotions. In these unsent letters, I expressed my desire for a future in which we might reclaim the intimacy of our past, where the sorrow of miscommunication would be replaced by the warmth of mutual vulnerability. I admitted my own flaws and moments when I took our love for granted. I admitted that my words, while intended as a light-hearted joke, were a symptom of a deeper neglect, a failing to completely comprehend the complexities of his inner life. I wanted him to understand that my sarcasm was not a reflection of his worth, but rather a misunderstanding of my own personal difficulties with acceptance and comparison. Days turned into nights, and quiet became our constant companion. I watched the seasons change from the window of our almost empty house, each day a faint echo of battles fought and love slowly fading. The irony of my situation was not lost on me. I had once said that my ex was bigger in every way, a hyperbolic remark meant to elicit laughter, only to discover that size and grandeur were metaphors for the depth of connection, understanding, and shared dreams. Tom's absence was a stark reminder of the gaps between phrases that had before seemed insignificant. Every missed text and unreturned call demonstrated how thin the line between laughter and hurt may be. During one of these long, reflective nights, I found myself examining our old images, each of which captured a frozen moment of shared delight and hope. I let my fingers to trace the curves of our smiles, the amusement in our eyes, and the silent affirmations of our love. Those visual memories depicted a moment when our souls were connected in a dance of mutual respect and affection. I saw in those photographs the strength of our link, even if it was now obscured by layers of misunderstanding and distance. There were times when I felt overcome by the need to go back in time, to erase the careless remarks and bridge the growing distance between us. But, as I discovered, time was not a luxury we could afford to waste. It marched on inexorably, unconcerned about the sadness and regret it left behind. One freezing winter morning, as I struggled to find the will to reach out again, I realized I had been clinging to a version of Tom from the past, rejecting the possibility that both of us had changed irreparably. In that moment of painful clarity, I realized that reconciliation might not imply a simple return to how things were. Instead, a significant shift would be required, a rebirth of our connection based on acceptance rather than perfection. I wrote one final letter, pouring out the raw reality of my heart, confessing the mistakes, the hurt, and my own shortcomings. I indicated a desire to heal, even if it meant leaving go of the familiar and facing an uncertain future. The letter was not an ultimatum, but rather a request for the kind of vulnerability that had previously brought us together, a vulnerability that spoke of second chances and the prospect of finding one other through forgiveness and growth. Tom's reaction, when it arrived, was as calm and unassuming as the rest of our brief exchanges. A short, halting text read, "I'm not sure if we can go back, but maybe we can try to see where this leads." It wasn't the enthusiastic rally that I had hoped for, but there was a glimmer of hope nestled in those words, a suggestion that perhaps our love was not completely lost, just waiting to be redefined. I interpreted his letter as both an invitation and an admission that, while previous wounds may never entirely heal, they might at least serve as the foundation for a more honest connection. The unknown was both exciting and terrifying, but I knew that continuing to live with regret was a fate worse than confronting the unknown. The months that followed were a gradual path toward comprehension. We started meeting more frequently, first in neutral settings, a quiet park bench, a dimly lit cafe, where the talk was free of the pretenses that had previously defined our meetings. We gradually began to discuss our worries, concerns, and the events that had led to our separation. It was not a simple process. There were days when quiet fell between us like a heavy veil, and old resentment surged to the surface, threatening to devour the delicate peace we were attempting to establish. However, with each struggle came a small victory, a shared grin, a sincere apology, or a moment of laughter that reminded us of who we once were. We learned that repairing our relationship necessitated not only forgiveness for the past, but also acceptance of the inherent flaws of the present. As time progressed, I came to see Tom not as the betrayed husband of a careless comment, but as a man bearing his own problems, each as heavy as the silent words we both kept. I began to recall his sweet soul, the way he would listen closely when I spoke, and how, even in periods of silent sadness, his eyes gleamed with a stubborn hope. We walked the tricky terrain of reconciliation together, recognizing that love was more than lofty declarations, it was about modest, everyday gestures of kindness and vulnerability. There were evenings when we cooked together, our combined efforts resulting in modest dishes that tasted of new beginnings rather than old regrets. There were lengthy walks in the evening when the stillness between us had turned from a symbol of disconnection to a gentle acknowledgement of the space we both required to recover. By reaching out to one another, we realized that our journey was not a return to an idyllic past, but rather the construction of a new story characterized by honesty, compassion, and a willingness to embrace change. However, just as the process of healing appeared to be taking hold, life, in its unpredictable whimsy, threw another curved ball, a revelation that called into question all I thought I understood about our relationship. One day, while sorting through old memories, I came across a journal buried away in one of our forgotten cabinets. It was Tom's private notebook, full of writings chronicling his innermost feelings throughout the years, which he had never revealed with me. My pulse hammered as I stood on the verge of a moral line, wondering if I had the authority to read such unguarded words. Curiosity, however, overcame caution, and I began reading. The journal entries were a patchwork of emotions, bits of elation interwoven with somber confessions, moments of quiet appreciation for someone he had loved, and admissions of long-held insecurities. One entry in particular left me reeling. Tom had admitted, sometime before we ever reconnected, that he had felt overshadowed, not only by external expectations but also by the larger-than-life persona of someone from his past. A person who, in his own fragile honesty, was described as bigger in every way. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. In that moment, the casual comment I had made appeared to have far-reaching implications. It was as if the phrase had become a mirror, reflecting our shared vulnerabilities, an uneasy need to be valued on a scale far greater than the sum of our parts. The epiphany was a heartbreaking reminder that what we frequently take for granted, a simple joke or offhand remark, can actually speak to the deepest portions of our souls, echoing concerns and aspirations we rarely admit openly. The finding pushed me to confront the notion that our alienation was caused by more than just one comment, but by long-buried hurts that had festered in our quiet. I debated whether to share this newfound understanding with Tom. I was afraid that sharing what I had discovered would cause further hurt, but I also knew that real reconciliation involved confronting even the most difficult truths. I eventually determined that our recovery journey must be based on complete honesty, no matter how difficult it is. One evening, clutching the journal in my shaky hands, I approached the topic. "Tom, I found something of yours," I muttered softly, almost inaudibly, as if afraid of upsetting the delicate balance we'd struck. His face paled, and for a long time, we sat in silence, heavy with whispered apologies, forgotten grief, and truths too hard to deny. "I know what you've read," he finally remarked, his tone calm but vulnerable. "I've been afraid that you'll see me as less than the person I try so hard to be." In that moment, our shared vulnerability pierced the long-frozen barriers between us, exposing the anxieties and insecurities that had kept us apart. We sat together in the dark light of a lamp, talking gently about our inner demons, allowing each confession to remove any remaining bitterness or misunderstanding. In the weeks and months that followed, we set out on a mission not only to save a failing marriage, but to completely redefine it. We sought the advice of a counselor, whose gentle probing and meticulous inquiries prompted us to confront aspects of ourselves that we had long ignored. With tears and shaking admissions, we revealed anxieties that had before felt too difficult to express. Tom explained that his withdrawal was a protection against feeling eternally inadequate, a youthful desire to be viewed as the hero in his own life tale, only to be confronted with the reality that he was, in fact, horribly human. I revealed that my carefree humor had occasionally concealed a deep-seated anxiety that I would never meet the demands of being an ideal mate. Those meetings were a crucible in which the raw elements of our love were tested and, eventually, refined. We discovered that forgiving was not a one-time act of absolution, but rather a continuous commitment to understanding and growth. Each session left us with a little less bitterness and a little more hope, with each shared tear symbolizing the potential of restoration. There were also times of levity, as we realized that comedy, when used with sensitivity, can be a great tool for reconnecting. Slowly, we began to create new memories together, ones defined by the promise of the future rather than the shadow of our past. We went to old haunts not to rehash the past, but to celebrate our tiny accomplishments in recovery. I began to see my casual remark not as a final, crushing blow, but as a painful lesson that required us both to recognize the fragility of our relationship and renew our commitment to care for one another in deeper, more meaningful ways. Our story, previously filled with misunderstandings and half-truths, gradually evolved into a redemption story, teaching us both that true intimacy was based on the unwavering bravery to confront our flaws head-on. The silence eventually returned, not as a nothingness, but as a pause between notes in a wonderful, resonant symphony. Texts and phone calls resumed, tentative but filled with newfound seriousness. There were still days when old scars arose unexpectedly, a careless remark here, a sad glance there, but they were met with the calm understanding of two people who had actually learned to forgive. I realized that the word "bigger in every way" will always carry a double meaning in my heart. It wasn't about comparing one individual to another or assessing worth on a superficial level. It served as a reminder that the weight of our past, if left uncontrolled, can distort the brightness of our future, that even the slightest comment, when loaded with unhealed hurt and missed aspirations, has the potential to mold destiny. As the years passed, our home gradually filled with reminders of our rekindled love, a collection of shared images on the mantel, humorous notes nestled into daily locations, and the peaceful comfort of knowing we had made it through the storm. I often think about how a single careless comment could have easily marked the end of our love story. In such thoughtful moments, I realized that our journey was about more than just losing a partner or repairing a damaged marriage. It was about discovering the resilience that lives in the aftermath of misunderstanding. I discovered that the greatest acts of love are often the quiet, almost invisible threads of daily kindness, the check-in texts that defied the silence, the sincere apologies that took weeks to mature, and the determined efforts to find each other again after becoming lost in the maze of our own creation. There were days when I traced the fading writing of the unsent letters that had held out hope for reconciliation. I'd run my fingertips over the pages of my diary, remembering the sorrow of those lonely evenings and the quiet power that slowly developed from within. In that personal journal, I discovered that every statement, confession, and tear had been a stepping stone toward healing. It was not a voyage defined by perfection, but rather by an honest, often painful, process of transformation. By accepting our own flaws, Tom and I realized that love may be as vast as the universe itself, a force capable of absorbing every mistake, every moment of regret, and transforming it into a tribute to our shared humanity. Now, years later, as I sit in the warm glow of an evening sunset, I reflect on the twists and turns that led us to this unexpected oasis of calm. I am not stupid enough to believe that all wounds have been totally healed or that our relationship is free of lingering memories of the past. But I've come to see that the beauty of our path is in its imperfections, the raw, unfiltered moments that remind us that we are, at our core, beautifully flawed human beings. The echo of that tragic phrase lingers in my memory, a reminder of how a foolish jest nearly cost me everything. However, in that echo, I hear lessons about growth, the transformational power of forgiveness, and the enduring strength of love that refuses to be defined by a single moment. Looking back, I know that life is an elaborate tapestry weaved from the threads of our experiences, each strand as vital as the next, no matter how little it appears. The journey from that disastrous night to the compassion that now pervades our daily lives has been one of reckoning, redemption, and steadfast determination to rediscover each other. I've learned that, while words can hurt, they can also heal, as long as they are followed by deeds rooted in honesty and a genuine desire to understand one another's deepest anxieties. Reflecting on the past, I can't help but wonder about the irony that brought us here. My casual statement about an ex being bigger in every way was intended to be a joke, but it became the trigger for a journey of profound growth and rediscovery. Love, it appears, has a way of turning even the most incorrect remarks into lessons that mold our destiny. True intimacy emerges in the spaces between what is spoken and what is felt, reminding us that the value of a connection is evaluated not by superficial comparisons, but by the depth of empathy, understanding, and readiness to address the scars of our common history. Now, as I type these lines, I am filled with thankfulness for the storm that once threatened to destroy everything, for it was that storm that compelled us to rebuild from the ground up. Our love is no longer defined by great gestures or eloquent confessions, it is defined by the quiet moments, the subtle exchange of glances, the unprompted text messages, and the genuine recognition of our own flaws. The once ominous silence that pervaded our home has been replaced with a gentle background hum of understanding and shared hope. I've come to see that every relationship, no matter how terribly wrong, has the potential for renewal if both hearts are willing to confront their truths. Tom and I are living proof that even when it appears that we have lost the conversation, when text messages go unanswered and silence builds peak by peak, there is always the opportunity to restart, to pick up the pieces and create a mosaic of fresh trust and deeper love. Our path demonstrates that, while the past cannot be changed, it does not have to determine our future. In its place, a new story emerges, one in which laughter and tears live in delicate balance, where every mistake is an opportunity for growth, and every word, no matter how small, is a building stone in the foundation of who we choose to be. So, as I reflect on the twisting path that led us from a casual remark to a confrontation with the depths of our insecurities, I am reminded that life is a never-ending process of learning and unlearning. Every misstep, every painful silence, every moment of doubt was part of the intricate choreography that led us here, a place where our lives are intertwined with the acceptance of our own frailty, and where the promise of tomorrow is built on the honest admission that even when words falter, hope persists. We are, after all, the total of every whispered apology, every unreturned text that ultimately makes its way back, and every bittersweet memory that teaches us how to love despite our flaws. Finally, our narrative is more than just a story of loss or separation, it is a journey of transformation, a living witness to the power of complexity and forgiveness in a world that all too often expects simple solutions. I declared my ex was bigger in every way, and in doing so, I unintentionally set off a chain of events that pushed me to examine not only the intricacies of our relationship, but also the essence of love itself. Today, when I walk hand in hand with Tom along a sunlit route, the echoes of that fateful comment fade into a distant memory, a reminder of how far we've gone and the limitless opportunity for growth that awaits us. We've discovered that love is never static, it grows, challenges, and deepens with each shared moment of honesty. Our future, however uncertain, is a blank canvas ready to be painted with the vivid colors of new beginnings, forged from the lessons of previous wounds and the incontrovertible reality that even in the darkest quiet, optimism can always find a way to speak. This story of reconciliation, of rediscovering connection when fissures threaten to destroy the cornerstone of our friendship, is a testament to the human heart's resilience. We may never be free of the echoes of our previous mistakes, but if we choose to accept them as catalysts for change rather than definitions of our worth, every word, careless or profound, can be transformed into a stepping stone on the journey to pure, unwavering love. And when the sun sets below the horizon, signaling the end of one day and the beginning of another, I take comfort in the fundamentally human fact that every ending, no matter how painful, is merely the prelude to a brand new beginning. I've realized that the path to repentance is rarely linear, it's full of unforeseen diversions, times of doubt, and the occasional retreat into solitude. However, hidden among these unanticipated twists is the beauty of our shared humanity, where every small act of bravery in the face of weakness glows like a beacon in the dark. It is a story that reminds me that even when it appears that all hope is lost, when text messages go unanswered and the silence becomes overwhelming, there is always the possibility of renewal if we are willing to reach out across the distance, to bridge the chasm with honesty and the transformative power of love. Today, I can confidently state that our relationship is stronger for having weathered the storm of hurt and misunderstanding. The casual echo of a prior joke has been recast as a lesson in empathy, a challenge to dig deeper into the hearts of those we care about. And, while the journey to healing has been difficult, it has also brought me face to face with an undeniable truth: the true measure of love is not in superficial comparisons or fleeting words, but in the unwavering commitment to stand by one another through every silence and storm. As I conclude this lengthy meditation on our trip, I am reminded that every twist and turn, no matter how painful they were, was required to reveal the true strength of our relationship. I'm glad for the times of vulnerability that drove us to address our concerns, as well as the courage we now share in accepting an imperfect but eternally true love. And in that joyful revolt against the stillness of the past, I've learned to treasure every clumsy word, loving gesture, and unreturned text that ultimately made its way back into our hearts. For in the fabric of our lives, even the tiniest whisper of hope can spark a blaze of love that shines brighter than any error ever could. Looking ahead, I am filled with a calm optimism, a sense that as long as we dare to be vulnerable and continue to speak the language of naked honesty, our shared story will only become richer and more resilient over time. Finally, it is not about determining worth by big comparisons or seeking approval in the shadows of a casual exchange. It is about creating something genuine and enduring from the fragments of our former selves, a tribute to the transformational power of forgiveness, understanding, and the human heart's limitless capacity to love, even when it appears that every text remains unanswered. And as each new day begins, I tell myself that every word, every silent moment, every spark of bravery is a step toward finding a love that is bigger in every aspect.